For years, the old secret regimes prevented anyone from admitting to any UFO experience. Now, for the first time, Major General Boris Surikov was able to tell us about an unidentified flying object encountered during the Second World War. As it approached, it electrically charged their bomber, threatening a massive fuel explosion. To save the plane, they jettisoned their bomb load, but reported their mission a complete success for fear of reprisals. One incident which revolutionized Russian military thinking about UFOs happened on September 20th, 1977, at Petrozavodsk on the Russian-Finnish border. At about 4 in the morning, over 170 witnesses, including 20 border guards and police, saw a large glowing object raining down beams of light. It hovered over the town for some 15 minutes before moving off towards the Finnish border. But it had been seen over a wide area for at least 4 hours before that. Colonel Boris Sokolov headed the Ministry of Defense's investigation team.
Later, having read the report, I found that a large group of military men had witnessed the event, about several hundred kilometers away from Petrozavodsk, in one of the border regions. When they tried to report it, using their usual field communications, they had telephone and cable lines, radio and shortwave, none of them worked. After the incident, which had lasted for several hours over Petrozavodsk, and a little shorter period of time over the border area, all communications were suddenly restored.
This event so concerned the military that for the first time they and the scientists began a unique state-funded research project. The Russian Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Defense in Moscow were able to draw on a potential observer force of some 6 million troops.
It was a huge number, an experiment that will never be repeated. It lasted 10 years, and the whole of the Soviet Union was involved, 1/6 of the globe. And the number of potential observers was over 10 million.
Up until now, this incident has always been dismissed as disinformation, a cover story for a secret rocket launching. Now, for the first time, Colonel Sokolov has testified to the actual events that led to one of the world's most extensive UFO research projects. If UFOs are tangible objects, they seem to demonstrate an extraordinary technology. In Moscow, there is a state-funded organization that is actively investigating new propulsion systems based on UFO reports. Dr. Anatoly Akimov is the director.
We are not looking to limit our research objectives by just trying to explain abnormal physical experiments. What we are trying to do is to go beyond the normal investigative boundaries. If we believe, and we certainly have good reason to do so, that the UFOs exist as a real phenomenon, then naturally the question arises as to whether our contemporary science can come to some understanding of them.
In stark contrast to the openness of the Russians, the British Ministry of Defense is still denying an incident that happened in 1980 here at the Woodbridge Joint British-American Air Force Base. This was one of the busiest military air bases in the United Kingdom. Its activities were highly secret, and it held one of NATO's largest stockpiles of nuclear weapons. It was in the early hours of December 28th that 2 teams of base security officers left the East Gate to investigate strange lights in the forest. One team included the deputy base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Halt, and in the other group was Larry Warren, then 19 years old.
I'm standing in Rendlesham Forest. We're on December 28th to 29th, 1980. Just behind me, Colonel Holt and a group of NCOs and officers had their sighting of events, which is recorded on the tape that he made that night, about a quarter mile that way. My event took place right here, heading toward this farmer's field. I had no idea what was about to happen. No one else with me really did at that time at all, except that this field in front of me was illuminated with some very bright, strange light. I noticed that this giant oak tree here was illuminated as well. That was my first indication that something wasn't right in the field.
As standard procedure, Lieutenant Colonel Holt was tape recording his team's progress through the forest. As they measured radiation levels, they spotted something through the trees. The voices you hear are from the actual tape. The pictures are a reconstruction.
Strange, small red light. Looks about maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. Switch off. The light is gone now. It was approximately 120 degrees. Try to sight it. Is it back again? Yes, sir. Go down the flashlight set. Let's go out to the edge of the clearing so we can get a better look at it. See if you can get the star scope on it. The light's still there, and all the barnyard animals have gotten quiet now. Yeah, we're heading about 110 to 120 degrees from the site. I'm through to the clearing now. Still getting a reading on the meter. About 2 clicks. Maybe count 3 to 4 clicks, getting stronger.
As Holt and his team were moving towards the light, Larry Warren and the others saw a curious circle of mist in the field in front of them.
Out in front of me as we approached, I could see, as I was watching this mist on the ground, there was other Air Force personnel, security, police, all throughout this field. Over in the distance was 2 cameras, and one was a video camera, one was a motion picture camera, and at the time the video cameras were very bulky technology, but I recognized it for what it was. Everything I saw in this field was documented on film that night, both on still photographs and on motion picture. There's no doubt about it. What I saw, I'll walk to the center of the area where this mist was. You can see it clearly. Ground zero would be here. After watching this object on the ground, a red ball of light moved in. I thought it was an A-10 taxiing to RAF Woodbridge behind me, about a mile. Came in over that far stand of trees, stopped over the circular fog-like object on the ground, dispersed in an explosion of color that was soundless, heatless, and what happened was a transformation somehow of this mist to a structured object. It was about 30 feet at the base, 20 feet in height, and a bank of blue lights at the base of it, and mother of pearl or rainbow effect all over. It was very difficult to look directly at. The worst thing to happen to me was that when the event transpired, when there was that transformation somehow, some senior people ran off into these woods, into these fields, and left us here. And why I didn't run could have been shock or whatever, but a number of us ran, a number of us just stayed glued.
I think it's something on the ground. I think it's something that's died on a tree right over. Let's go to the first nightbird we've seen. We're about 150 to 200 yards from the site. Everything else is just deathly calm. There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. Yes, it's right on half dead. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
But the military personnel were not the only witnesses. From his house near the runway, local resident Jerry Harris watched the strange lights around the forest.
I stood there for ages. It seemed like ages watching it. And they were dipping down behind the trees. They were going down behind the trees and coming back up again and sort of zigzagging about. And I thought, well, if they were airplanes, they would crash into the forest because the runway's over there and they're over there.
A strict security clampdown, denials, and other explanations quickly followed the incident. Oxford Nest Lighthouse, 6 miles away, was one. Others included meteorites, police cars, and bright stars. The alleged films and photographs have never been released, but one piece of evidence remains. Lieutenant Colonel Halt's report, authenticated as genuine by the British Ministry of Defense.
Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Looks about maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out.
It was released 3 years later through pressure from Warren and others using the Freedom of Information Act.
We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everyone else is just deathly calm. There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird.
Despite government pronouncements, one man whose views cannot be ignored is Lord Peter Hill Norton, Admiral of the Fleet and Britain's former Chief of Defense Staff in the early 1970s.
It seems to me that something physical took place. I have no doubt that something landed at this U.S. Air Force base, and I have no doubt that it got the people concerned, the U.S. Air Force people and the commanding general at the base, into a very considerable state. My view is that the Ministry of Defense, who were repeatedly questioned about this, not only by me but by other people, have doggedly stuck to their normal line, which is that nothing which was of defense interest took place on that occasion. My position about this has always been quite clear, and I have said this both in public and on the television and on the radio, and I said it face to face to Lord Trefgarne when we met. Either large numbers of people, including the commanding general at Bentwaters, were hallucinating, and for an American Air Force nuclear base, this is extremely dangerous, or what they say happened did happen. And in either of those circumstances, there can only be one answer, and that is that it was of extreme defense interest to the United Kingdom. And I have never had a satisfactory rebuttal of that view.
Most UFO incidents are reported by ordinary people, and more often than not, the event itself can be deeply traumatic. But more traumatic is the secrecy machine that moves into action to deny, to ridicule, or even to threaten those who have unwittingly experienced something quite out of the ordinary, as a small community discovered when a UFO allegedly crashed near Roswell, New Mexico.
He said, "You did not see anything. There was no crash here. You don't go into town and making any rumors that you saw anything, that there was any crashes." And he said you could get in a lot of trouble. Well, I was a little agitated, a little mad about the situation when he called me an SOB to start with. And I said, "Hey, look, mister," I said, "I'm a civilian and you can't do a damn thing to me." And he said, "Oh, yes, we can, mister." He said, "Somebody will be picking your bones out of the sand."
Out of This World will continue on TLC.